outsider, but someone whose people are traditionally enemies of the nation where you live. Now imagine that this very person becomes a key figure in the story of humanity's salvation. Sounds unlikely? Well, get ready to learn about the extraordinary journey of Ruth, a woman who defied all expectations and became a crucial link in the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Ruth 1:1. Thus begins the story of Ruth, a narrative that transports us to a turbulent period in Israel's history. At that time, God's people lived through cycles of disobedience, punishment, and repentance. It was in this context that a Moabite woman, considered a foreigner and even an enemy by the Israelites, entered the scene and forever changed the course of history. Ruth was a young woman from Moab, a neighboring nation to Israel. The Moabites were descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew, but over the centuries, they became adversaries of the Israelites. Despite this historical animosity, God had surprising plans to use Ruth in a powerful way. Ruth's journey began with a tragedy. She married an Israelite who had moved to Moab with his family to escape the famine, but happiness was short-lived. Within a few years, Ruth found herself a widow, just like her mother-in-law Naomi and her sister-in-law Orpah. It was at this moment of deep loss and uncertainty that Ruth made a decision that would change not only her life, but the destiny of all humanity. When Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, her homeland, Ruth made a surprising choice. Instead of remaining in Moab, among her own people, she decided to accompany her mother-in-law. With words that have echoed through the centuries, Ruth declared, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God." Ruth 1:16. This declaration of loyalty was not just to Naomi, but to the God of Israel. Ruth was abandoning everything she knew, her family, her culture, her gods, to follow the true God. Little did she know that this decision would place her directly in the lineage of the promised Messiah. The story of Ruth teaches us that God can use anyone, regardless of their origin or past, to fulfill his purposes. She became the great-grandmother of King David, and, consequently, an ancestor of Jesus Christ. Her life is a testament to the grace and love of God, which transcends national boundaries and cultural prejudices. In the days when the judges governed Israel, the land faced difficult times. Famine ravaged the country, a common consequence when the people turned away from God. In Bethlehem, which ironically means house of bread, the scarcity was especially severe. The book of Ruth tells us that, in the time when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Ruth chapter 1 verse 1. This man named Elimelech, whose name means "My God is King," was married to Naomi, which means pleasant or sweet. Along with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they formed a typical Israelite family. However, the famine forced them to take a drastic measure, to leave their homeland and seek refuge in Moab. The journey from Bethlehem to Moab was not only physical but also spiritual. Moab was a neighboring nation to Israel, but the relations between the two peoples were tense. The Moabites were descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew, through an incestuous relationship with his older daughter. Over the centuries, the Moabites became enemies of Israel, worshiping other gods and frequently clashing with God's chosen people. The Bible succinctly tells us that the family arrived in Moab and settled there. Ruth chapter 1 verse 2. They established themselves in the foreign land, hoping to find relief from the famine that plagued their homeland. At first, it may have seemed that they had made the right decision. There was food in Moab, and the family could survive. However, living in a foreign land, far from God's people and surrounded by worshippers of other gods, would bring its own challenges. As time passed, Elimelech and Naomi's sons grew up in a foreign land. Mahlon and Chilion reached the age to marry, but instead of returning to Israel to find wives among their own people, they married Moabite women. The biblical text informs us that they married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. Ruth chapter 1 verse 4. This is how Ruth entered the story. A young Moabite, she married Mahlon, while her compatriot Orpah married Chilion. These unions were uncommon and even discouraged by Israelite law, which sought to maintain the purity of the lineage and faith of God's chosen people. However, What might have been seen as a mistake in the eyes of more traditional Israelites was, in fact, part of God's divine plan. God, in His infinite wisdom, was weaving a tapestry of redemption that would include not only Israelites but also foreigners willing to embrace the true God. Ruth's marriage to Mahlon introduced her not only to a new family, but also to a new faith. Although the Bible does not provide details about the spiritual life of the family during this period, we can imagine that Ruth was exposed to the stories and traditions of the God of Israel through her husband and her mother-in-law. Life in Moab, however, would not be easy for this Israeli family. Although they had escaped famine, they would face a series of tragedies that would test their faith and forever change the course of their lives. The scripture tells us that they lived there about 10 years. Ruth chapter 1 verse 4. A decade passed. 10 years of life in a foreign land, away from God's people, away from the temple and the sacrifices. 10 years of adapting to a new culture, of putting down roots in foreign soil. 10 years that would end in tragedy. During this time, Ruth must have learned a lot about the God of Israel. Perhaps she heard stories about Abraham, who left his own land to follow God's call. Or about Joseph, who became a foreigner in Egypt, but remained faithful to God, and ended up saving his family. These stories of faith and faithfulness in a foreign land may have deeply touched Ruth's heart, preparing her for the decision she would have to make in the future. Ruth's encounter with Elimelech's family was not just a meeting of different cultures, but an encounter with the living God of Israel. Although the Bible does not give us details about Ruth's spiritual life before her marriage, it is clear that something in her experience with this Israeli family profoundly impacted her. The story of Ruth reminds us that God often works in mysterious ways. What seemed to be a series of unfortunate events, famine, forced migration, marriages to foreigners, was in fact the stage for one of the greatest dramas of redemption in biblical history. Ruth's encounter with Elimelech's family was the first step in a journey that would lead her not only to a new land, but to a new life, a new faith, and a place in the lineage of the Messiah. Her story is a testament to God's love that transcends national boundaries and cultural prejudices, a love that welcomes all who are willing to follow Him, no matter their origin. Thus ends this chapter of Ruth's story, with an Israeli family established in Moab and 2 young Moabite women united to it by marriage. The stage was set for the dramatic events that would follow, events that would transform Ruth's life and place her at the center of God's plan for the redemption of humanity. The life of the Israelite family in Moab was about to take a tragic turn. The book of Ruth reveals a series of devastating losses that would shake the foundations of this small family. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left alone with her 2 sons. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 3. This sudden loss was just the beginning of a series of tragedies that would befall Naomi. In a foreign land, without the support of her native community, she found herself a widow, responsible for 2 young men. The death of Elimelech was not only a personal tragedy, but also a blow to the family's identity as Israelites in a foreign land. He was the strongest link to their heritage in Israel. With his departure, the family's future in Moab became even more uncertain. However, life went on. Mahlon and Chilion, now adults, took on the responsibility of caring for their mother and maintaining the family. For a brief moment, it may have seemed that they had found some stability. Naomi now had 2 daughters-in-law to help with household tasks, and perhaps the hope of grandchildren on the horizon. But destiny had other plans. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Ruth chapter 1, verse 5. In a cruel twist of fate, Naomi lost her 2 sons. The tragedy that began with the death of Elimelech was now complete. Naomi's pain must have been unbearable. Not only had she lost her entire immediate family, but she was now in an extremely vulnerable situation. In the ancient society, women depended on their husbands and sons for protection and sustenance. Without them, Naomi faced an uncertain future and possibly poverty. Ruth and Orpah also found themselves in a precarious situation. Young widows, they were now tied to a foreign mother-in-law, without the prospect of children to continue the lineages of their husbands. In the culture of the time, this was a desperate situation. It was in this moment of profound loss and uncertainty that Naomi made a courageous decision. The news that the famine in Israel had ended reached her ears, bringing a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness of her situation. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. Ruth chapter 1, verse 6. After years of living as a foreigner, facing loss after loss, the possibility of returning to her homeland, to her people, and to the familiarity of her culture must have been irresistible to Naomi. This decision, however, was not made lightly. Returning to Bethlehem meant leaving behind the graves of her husband and sons. It meant a long and possibly dangerous journey. It meant facing a community she had left years before and explaining everything that had happened. But it also meant the possibility of a new beginning, of finding support among her own people, of being closer to the God of Israel. With her decision made, Naomi prepared for the journey. But she faced a dilemma: what to do with her Moabite daughters-in-law. Initially, it seemed that Ruth and Orpah were willing to accompany Naomi. Perhaps they saw this as their duty to the family of their deceased husbands. Or perhaps they simply had nowhere to go in Moab. However, at some point during the journey, Naomi stopped and spoke to her daughters-in-law. With words full of love and concern, she urged them to return to their families in Moab. Naomi knew that life in Israel would be difficult for two young Moabite widows. She did not want them to face the prejudice and hardships they would surely encounter. "Return home, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you, as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Ruth chapter 1 verses 8, 9. Naomi's words evoked an emotional reaction from her daughters-in-law. This moment of farewell must have been painful for all. Despite their cultural differences, these three women had become a family, united by the joys of marriage and the pain of loss. Orpah, after much hesitation and tears, decided to follow Naomi's advice. She kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Ruth chapter 1 verse 14. Her decision was understandable and probably wise from a practical standpoint. In Moab, she would have the support of her family and the possibility of a new beginning. But Ruth made a different decision. The text tells us that she clung to Naomi. Ruth chapter 1 verse 14. This seemingly simple decision would change the course of her life and place her at the center of God's plan. Seeing that Ruth was determined to go with her, Naomi did not insist any longer. Ruth chapter 1 verse 18. Thus, the two women, the elderly Israelite and the young Moabite, continued their journey together, facing an uncertain future, but united by a bond of love and loyalty that transcended national and cultural boundaries. Ruth's decision, born out of tragedy and loyalty, would put her on the path to becoming an ancestor of King David, and ultimately of the Messiah himself, Jesus Christ. Her story reminds us that God often works through the most improbable circumstances and the most unexpected people to fulfill his redemptive purposes. The journey back to Bethlehem would be just the beginning of a new phase in the lives of these two women. They would face many challenges ahead, but Ruth's faith and Naomi's experience would guide them through these difficult times, leading them to a destiny neither of them could have imagined. The journey from Moab to Bethlehem must have been arduous for Naomi and Ruth. Two women traveling alone would face countless dangers and difficulties along the way. However, guided by Naomi's determination and Ruth's unwavering loyalty, they finally arrived at the gates of Bethlehem. Their arrival caused quite a stir in the small town. The inhabitants of Bethlehem could hardly believe their eyes when they saw Naomi returning after so many years. The biblical text tells us that the whole city was stirred because of them. The women of the city in particular seemed surprised and asked, "Can this be Naomi?" Ruth 1:19. This reaction reveals how much Naomi had changed. The woman who left Bethlehem years ago with a husband and two sons, full of hope for a better future, was now returning as an aged and bitter widow, accompanied only by a foreign daughter-in-law. The transformation must have been shocking for those who had known her before. Naomi, feeling the weight of her losses and aware of the change that had occurred in her, responded with words laden with bitterness. "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. for the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has testified against me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Ruth 1:20-21. The name Naomi means pleasant or sweet, while Mara means bitter. This name change reflects the profound transformation that Naomi had experienced. She viewed her life as a tragedy, feeling that God had turned against her. However, little did Naomi know that her story of loss was about to transform into a story of redemption and hope. While Naomi dealt with her pain and the reactions of her former neighbors, Ruth faced her own challenges. As a foreigner in an unfamiliar land, she must have felt out of place and insecure. The customs, the language, the religion, everything was new to her. Moreover, as a Moabite, she likely faced prejudice and distrust from the Israelites. Despite these difficulties, Ruth did not remain paralyzed. Aware of the precarious situation she and Naomi were in, Ruth took the initiative to seek a means of sustenance. She said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Ruth 2:2. This proposal from Ruth demonstrates her strength of character and her willingness to work hard. Gleaning, collecting the leftovers left by the harvesters, was a difficult and often humiliating job, usually reserved for the poorest members of society. It was also a right guaranteed by Moses' law to the poor, foreigners, orphans, and widows. Naomi agreed with Ruth's plan, likely recognizing that they did not have many other options. Thus, Ruth went out to the fields, determined to provide for herself and her mother-in-law. It just so happened that she was gleaning in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Ruth 2:3. This just so happened seems casual, but in the biblical narrative it often indicates the providential hand of God working behind the scenes. Boaz was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem, described as a man of standing. When he arrived from Bethlehem to check on the harvest, he immediately noticed Ruth's presence. "Whose young woman is that?" he asked the overseer of the harvest. Ruth 2:5. The overseer replied, identifying Ruth as the Moabite who had returned with Naomi. He also praised Ruth's work ethic, saying that she had asked permission to glean and had worked tirelessly since morning, with only a short rest. Impressed by what he heard, Boaz approached Ruth and spoke directly to her. His words were surprisingly kind and generous towards a foreigner. "Listen, my daughter. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Ruth 2:8-9. Ruth was taken aback by this unexpected kindness. She bowed down with her face to the ground and asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Ruth 2:10. Boaz's response reveals that he was well informed about Ruth's situation. "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth 2:11-12. These words show that Ruth's reputation preceded her. Her loyalty to Naomi and her decision to embrace the God of Israel had been noticed and admired. Boaz recognized Ruth's faith and character, and he responded with generosity and protection. Boaz went further in his kindness. He invited Ruth to share a meal with his workers, giving her bread and vinegar. He also instructed his workers to intentionally drop more grain so that Ruth could gather it. By the end of the day, Ruth had gathered an impressive amount of barley, about 22 liters. She took her harvest back to the city, where Naomi was surprised by the quantity. When Naomi learned that Ruth had worked in Boaz's field, she recognized God's hand in this event. "That man is our close relative," Naomi explained to Ruth. "He is one of our guardian redeemers." Ruth 2:20. This information added a new dimension to the situation. In Israelite law, a close relative had the responsibility to redeem family members who had fallen into hardship by buying back lost property or marrying a widow to continue the family line. Thus, what began as a desperate struggle for survival, with Ruth willing to do the hard and humble work of gleaning, unexpectedly transformed into a situation of hope. Through Boaz's kindness and divine providence, Ruth and Naomi not only found a source of sustenance, but also a possible path to the redemption of their situation. This chapter of Ruth's story reminds us that even in the most difficult moments, when everything seems lost, God may be working behind the scenes, preparing a way of hope and restoration. Ruth's courage and initiative, combined with divine providence, opened doors that seemed firmly closed, setting the stage for the surprising events yet to come. The meeting between Ruth and Boaz was a crucial moment in the narrative, marked by the unexpected kindness of an influential man towards a foreigner in need. When Boaz arrived from Bethlehem to oversee the harvest, his gaze immediately fell upon Ruth, a figure unknown among the usual workers. Curious, Boaz inquired about the identity of the young woman. The foreman in charge of the reapers promptly responded, not only identifying Ruth but also praising her incredible work ethic. He reported how Ruth had arrived early and worked tirelessly, with only a brief pause for rest. Impressed by what he heard, Boaz decided to approach Ruth directly. His words were surprisingly warm and generous. "Listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field nor go from here, but stay close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they reap and go after them. I have commanded the young men not to touch you. And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Ruth 2, 8, 9. This offer of protection and provision was extraordinary, especially considering Ruth's status as a foreigner. Boaz was essentially ensuring her safety and sustenance, a gesture of kindness that went far beyond normal social obligations. Ruth's reaction to this unexpected generosity was one of deep gratitude and humility. She fell on her face and asked, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner?" Ruth 2:10. Boaz's response revealed that he was well aware of Ruth's situation. "I have been told all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before." Ruth 2:11. Boaz then pronounced a blessing over Ruth, acknowledging her faith in the God of Israel. "The Lord repay you for your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Ruth 2:12. These words demonstrated that Ruth's reputation preceded her. Her loyalty to Naomi and her decision to embrace the God of Israel had been noticed and admired. Boaz recognized not only Ruth's noble character, but also her newly adopted faith, seeing her as a true convert to the God of Israel. Boaz's kindness did not stop there. He invited Ruth to share the meal with his workers, a significant gesture of inclusion. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." Ruth 2:14. This act of sharing a meal was a powerful form of social acceptance in ancient culture. Moreover, Boaz secretly instructed his workers to be intentionally generous towards Ruth. "Let her glean even among the sheaves and do not reproach her. Also let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean and do not rebuke her." Ruth 2:15, 16. This instruction went beyond the Mosaic law, which already required farmers to leave the edges of their fields for the poor to glean. Boaz was ensuring that Ruth had an abundant harvest, far more than she could normally expect. The result of this generosity was impressive. By the end of the day, Ruth had gleaned an astonishing amount of barley. When she returned to the city and showed Naomi the fruits of her labor, her mother-in-law was amazed. "Where have you gleaned today, and where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth 2:19. When Ruth revealed that she had worked in Boaz's field, Naomi immediately recognized God's hand in this occurrence. She exclaimed, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead." And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives." Ruth 2:20. This revelation added a new dimension to the situation. In Israelite law, a close relative had the responsibility to redeem family members who had fallen into hardship. This could include buying back lost property or marrying a widow to continue the family line. Boaz's kindness, therefore, was not merely an act of random charity. As a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband, Boaz had a potential responsibility towards Ruth and Naomi. His generosity could be seen as a first step towards fulfilling that familial duty. Naomi, realizing the opportunity at hand, advised Ruth to continue working in Boaz's fields. "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that people do not threaten you in another field." Ruth 2:22. Thus Ruth continued to work in Boaz's fields until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, remaining at home with her mother-in-law. During this time she must have become a familiar figure to Boaz and his workers, earning even more respect for her diligence and character. The encounter between Ruth and Boaz illustrates several important themes. First, it demonstrates how kindness and generosity can transcend cultural and social barriers. Boaz, a wealthy and respected man, showed compassion to a foreigner in need, importance of reputation and character. Boaz's kindness was, in part, a response to Ruth's own goodness, her loyalty to Naomi, and her newly adopted faith in the God of Israel. This reminds us that our actions and choices can significantly impact how others treat us. Finally, the meeting between Ruth and Boaz demonstrates how God often works through seemingly casual circumstances to fulfill his purposes. What appeared to be a chance encounter in a harvest field was, in fact, the beginning of a redemption story that would have lasting implications not only for Ruth and Naomi, but for the entire history of Israel and, by extension, for the history of salvation. As Ruth continued to work in Boaz's fields, the stage was set for the next developments in this remarkable story of faith, loyalty, and redemption. Boaz's kindness had planted seeds of hope in the hearts of Ruth and Naomi, seeds that would soon blossom in ways none of them could have foreseen. As the harvest was coming to an end, Naomi realized it was time to secure a more stable future for Ruth. Well versed in the laws and customs of Israel, including the practice of levirate marriage, Naomi saw in Boaz an opportunity for Ruth's redemption. Naomi devised a bold plan and shared it with Ruth. "My daughter, I need to seek security for you so that things will go well for you. Boaz, with whose young women you have been, is he not our relative? Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Ruth 3:1-4. This plan may seem strange to modern readers, but in the context of the culture of the time, it was an acceptable way for a widow to claim her levirate rights. Ruth agreed to the plan, once again demonstrating her trust in Naomi. "I will do whatever you say." Ruth 3:5. Following Naomi's instructions, Ruth went to the threshing floor. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking, he was in good spirits and went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Ruth 3:7. In the middle of the night, Boaz was startled and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Ruth 3:8. He asked, "Who are you?" And Ruth answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Ruth 3:9. Ruth's response was, in fact, a marriage proposal. By asking Boaz to spread his cloak over her, Ruth was requesting that he fulfill his role as redeemer. Boaz's reaction was one of surprise and admiration. "The Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Ruth 3:10-11. Boaz acknowledged the nobility of Ruth's actions but mentioned an obstacle. "Although it is true that I am a redeemer, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning if he wants to redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." Ruth 3:12-13. Ruth lay at Boaz's feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. Boaz said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." Ruth 3:14. He then gave Ruth a generous amount of barley to take home. When Ruth returned and told Naomi everything that had happened, her mother-in-law was pleased with the outcome. "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Ruth 3:18. This episode at the threshing floor is a crucial point in Ruth's story. It is a moment of great risk and vulnerability for her, but also of great courage and faith. Ruth trusted in Naomi's plan and in Boaz's integrity, placing her future in their hands and ultimately in God's hands. The scene also reveals much about Boaz's character. His reaction to Ruth's proposal shows that he is a man of integrity, honor, and compassion. He praises Ruth's loyalty to her deceased husband's family and promises to do everything in his power to help her, even if it means yielding his rights to another man. Naomi's plan and the night at the threshing floor demonstrate the complexity of the laws and customs of the time, particularly regarding marriage and inheritance. The custom of levirate marriage, although it may seem strange to us today, was a way to provide security for widows and preserve family lines. More importantly, this episode illustrates how God was working behind the scenes, using Ruth's courageous actions and Naomi's wisdom to accomplish his purposes. What began as a risky plan to secure Ruth's safety would end up having implications far beyond this small family, affecting the entire history of Israel. As the story unfolds, we see how each piece fits perfectly into the divine plan. Ruth's faithfulness, Naomi's wisdom, and Boaz's integrity combine to create a story of redemption that foreshadows the greater story of redemption that God was weaving for all humanity. The story of Ruth reaches its climax with the resolution of the redemption issue. The morning after their meeting at the threshing floor, Boaz kept his promise and went to the city gate, the place where official business was conducted. Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came by, Boaz called out to him, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Ruth 4:1. Boaz then gathered 10 elders of the city as witnesses and presented the case to the closest relative. Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do so. But if you do not want to, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to redeem it except you, and I am next in line. Ruth 4:3, 4. The man replied that he would redeem the land, but Boaz then revealed the additional condition. On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. Ruth 4:5. Faced with this additional obligation, the closest relative backed out. "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Ruth 4:6. This refusal opened the way for Boaz to redeem not only the property, but also to marry Ruth. The agreement was sealed according to the custom of the time. To finalize the transaction, the man removed his sandal and gave it to Boaz. Ruth 4:8. Boaz then declared before the witnesses, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." Ruth 4:9-10. The people and the elders present blessed the union, saying, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem." Ruth 4:11. Thus, Boaz and Ruth were married. Their union was blessed with a child, bringing great joy not only to the couple, but also to Naomi. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Ruth 4:14-15. The baby was named Obed, which means servant. The narrative concludes with a surprising revelation about the significance of this birth. Obed was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Ruth 4:17. This final genealogy reveals God's broader purpose in this seemingly simple story of love and redemption. Ruth, a Moabite foreigner, became the great-grandmother of King David, and by extension, an ancestor of Jesus Christ. The story of Ruth is a powerful testament to divine providence and redemption. It shows us how God can use difficult circumstances and unlikely people to fulfill His purposes. The faithfulness of Ruth, the wisdom of Naomi, and the integrity of Boaz combined to create a lineage that would lead to the Messiah. This narrative teaches us valuable lessons about loyalty, faith, and God's providential care. It reminds us that God can turn our losses into gains, our bitterness into sweetness, and our hopelessness into a glorious future. Dear viewer, the story of Ruth is not just a tale from the past, but a message for us today. Just as God worked in Ruth's life, He wants to work in your life too. No matter how difficult your circumstances may be, or how unlikely your redemption seems, remember, the God of Ruth is your God too. How about reflecting on how this story applies to your life? Where do you see God's hand at work in situations that seem hopeless? How can you demonstrate the same faith and loyalty that Ruth exhibited? If this message touched your heart, and you wish to learn more about the incredible stories of the Bible and how they apply to your life, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, where we will continue to explore the rich truths of God's Word. Remember, just as God had a plan for Ruth, He has a plan for you. Stay with us on this journey of discovery and spiritual growth. Leave a like on this video if it was a blessing to you, and share it with someone who might be encouraged by this story of hope and redemption. Until the next video, may God bless you abundantly.